Will there be a purge at the Politburo? As China's Communist Congress gets underway, could President Xi Jinping position himself as the next Chairman Mao? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Chinese Communist Party. The political maneuverings of Xi Jinping could drastically change the makeup of China's communist leadership. The political elites are gathering in Beijing for a twice-a-decade party congress. And at the end of the week, we could see Xi throw his rivals out and install a small group of loyalists who could elevate him to the heights of Mao Zedong. But President Xi has his detractors, and they want their shot at power. So while the events of the next few days are largely scripted political theater, some observers say the party election could produce a shock result. Natalie Pohonen reports.
In the Great Hall of the People, China's biggest political production is now underway. The 19th Communist Party Congress is a carefully orchestrated event, which only happens every 5 years, bringing together an ensemble of more than 2,000 delegates. But there is only one star of the show, China's president and the party's general secretary, Xi Jinping. In a speech that ran for more than 3 hours, Xi told the audience and the world that China had entered a new era.
我国发展仍处于重要战略机遇期，前景十分光明，挑战也十分严峻。全党同志一定要登高望远，居安思危，勇于变革，勇于创新，永不僵化，永不停滞。
While day one of this week-long event was on open display, the real politics will take place in private. Xi Jinping is the party's core leader, but this Congress will decide who will join him or stay by his side in the upper echelons. New members will be selected for the Central Committee, the Politburo, and the ultimate circle of power, the Standing Committee. Xi has dedicated much of his 5 years as leader to an anti-corruption campaign, in which factional rivals have fallen and potentially long careers for rising players have been cut short. He has promised to keep the party on that path.
我们党要更加自觉地坚持党的领导和我国社会主义制度，坚决反对一切削弱、歪曲、否定 党的领导和我国社会主义制度的言行。
When President Xi came to power, he had a dream, the Chinese dream. The goal is to transform the nation into what he calls a moderately prosperous society and ensure China is once again one of the great world powers. More than 60 million people have been lifted out of poverty during his tenure, and with Xi at the helm, Beijing has been exerting its diplomatic muscle. China's economic progress has changed lives, but the drive to create the dream has come with a high political cost. There is little to no room for public dissent or criticism of the party and its leadership. Xi has strengthened both the power of the party and his place as the core driver of reform. And after this Congress, the nation will learn how much longer his vision for China will likely be a reality. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss China's Communist Party further, I'm joined now from Hong Kong by Willy Wolap Lam. He's an adjunct professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. From Ann Arbor, Michigan, we have Huang Ang. She is a member of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and a faculty associate at the Center for Chinese Studies. And finally, from Washington, D.C., Surabh Gupta, senior analyst at the Institute for China-America Studies. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let me begin in Washington and first ask, what do you think we will see as the culmination of this Congress? A new generation of Chinese leaders or the concentration of power behind one man?
I would say we would see the concentration of power behind one man, but we would also see that power distributed within the collective leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. The real question is whether a young new cohort of leaders will be elevated, including in the Politburo Standing Committee. And that will be a key test of the willingness of President Xi to transfer power to that new generation. At this point of time, I think he is at the pinnacle of his power, but what I gauge from his conduct is that he is using his charismatic leadership to further the charismatic leadership of the collective leadership of the party. So we will see where matters stand at the end, by the end of this month.
Yeah, I think that is a very accurate assessment of what we expect to see in the coming years, that although Xi Jinping is concentrating power on himself, the key task is really whether he will lay out a set of norms of shared leadership in the coming generations.
And Willie Lo Lap Lam, let me get your opinion as well on the same question.
I beg to differ because we must remember that the idea of the collective leadership was laid down by Deng Xiaoping in the early 80s. And one of the important maneuvers of Xi Jinping has been to destroy this collective leadership and to arrogate most powers to himself. Well, that's why he's been known as the chairman of everything. He's known as potentially the Mao Zedong of the 21st century. And I think at the end of the week, as we know the results of the new members of the Central Committee, and then at the first plenary session of the Central Committee, one day later, the membership of the Politburo Standing Committee, I think it will become quite clear that Xi Jinping has no interest in grooming a younger generation because the die has already been cast. I think he wants to stay in power for at least 15 years. That means until the 21st Party Congress in 2027. So this, of course, doesn't mean that he will have all the powers. The Communist Party has 90 million members, and there are major factions and power blocks within the party. And to a certain extent, he has to share power with other members of the power blocks. But for the first time since the end of the Cultural Revolution, I think we will have a very strong, charismatic leader, if also a leader with a Machiavellian streak, who is determined to exercise power in a very highly concentrated manner.
Okay, Willie Lo Lap Lam, let me ask you further then. Do you think the Chinese public wants that more Maoist-style leadership of a strong man, or are they looking to more of a collective power and newer generation of various leaders?
Well, the Chinese public has no choice. Actually, even the 2,287 delegates who are now congregated in Beijing, they have very little choice. You mentioned earlier in your introduction that there would be an election, but actually no election is involved. It's a rubber stamp body. These 2,000 odd delegates, when they arrived in Beijing last week, they were given a slate of candidates, and there was very little choice involved. And the identities of the 7 most powerful people in China, the new members of the Politburo Standing Committee, had already been decided well before the delegates arrived. So it is a typical Chinese election where the results are known before the votes are cast.
Okay, Surab, let me ask your response then to this. You kind of envisioned Xi Jinping having it both ways in a sense, the party actually having it both ways. Willie Lo Lap Lam does not see it that way. Where do you think he's wrong?
I don't want to say who is right and who is wrong, because there is a considerable degree of inscrutability by which the party operates and how these the national congresses operate. So the proof of the pudding will only be at the end of the Congress, at the first plenum of the 19th Congress. That having been said, let me throw out something out here. 10 years back, it was thought that the front runners for the position were a gentleman who's currently the premier, it's Li Keqiang, and a gentleman named of Li Wanqiu. it was not Xi Jinping. It was not that well choreographed, as you see. There was what was called a kind of an open ballot, a wider list of candidates who were provided even from provinces, who the Central Committee members and the parliamentarians could cast a ballot for. And here was this charismatic candidate by Xi Jinping who just went right up the ranks, got the highest number of votes, and thereby became the leader of the fifth generation. So there are some managed surprises out here, and we should not discount that. And therefore, it is important that even in this Congress, it should not be Xi Jinping who dictates who his successor is. He can set out a cohort, a group, who he would like to see elevated, but leave that to the party to determine. And I think we need to give a little credit out here also how the party works. It is a collective leadership, and also many of the actions that President Xi has taken, even though he might be the chairman of everything, have followed normal party processes. In the division of labor within the Politburo Standing Committee has not been abused, and those processes have been followed. And on the economic reform front, many of his dictates have actually not come through because the State Council, the government, have chosen not to go down the path that he perhaps may have wished in terms of structural reform. So I would say there are quite a lot of matters which are up for kind of contestation and competition, but I would say a managed competition, and therefore we will have to see where matters stand at the end of the month, considering that he is so powerful and he would like to dictate outcomes, but he should not dictate or each and every he should not be dotting the I's and the T's and leave that to the party members to do.
Okay, so you believe there are
perhaps
go ahead, Willie.
We are different. Yeah, perhaps we are seeing a different party and government. I said earlier that the collective leadership mechanism, which Deng Xiaoping painstakingly put together in the early 80s, because he drew the right lesson from the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, which, of course, was dominated by only one strong man, Mao Zedong. That's why he instituted the collective leadership. But Xi Jinping, as I said, he is a charismatic leader with a Machiavellian streak. So he has been very successful in pulling the strings behind the scenes to ensure that he himself, or at least his own faction, the Xi Jinping faction, are now dictating most of the major events in the party. Just give you an example. According to well-established tradition, under the principle of the collective leadership, the prime minister was given charge of the economy. Previous prime minister, who is well known in the U.S., for example, Zhu Rongji and the previous prime minister Wen Jiabao, they were known as the economic czar. They were the head of this most highest level decision-making body on finance and economics called the Central Living Group on Finance and Economics, which had always been headed by the prime minister. But this changed from day one when Xi Jinping became General Secretary. He gave this title to himself, and Li Keqiang, who is much more liberal, much more pro-reform, and he knows the West much better than Xi Jinping. He speaks very good English and so forth. He has been relegated to just exercising, to just carrying out decisions made by Xi Jinping. So there's a fundamental difference, I think, between the Xi leadership and all previous leaderships.
Okay. Okay, Huang An, let me ask you, we have some varying opinions then on exactly how the party will take shape in the culmination of this Congress. But I'd like to ask you, we know the public does not have a voice, does not have a vote in this, but if you can speak to what the public, the Chinese public actually supports here, do they want that Mao-style leadership back again, or are they looking for this newer, more dynamic generation of leaders?
Well, I think that survey results actually show that the prime concern for the Chinese public is continued economic prosperity and stability. So as to how that is achieved, I think that actually different parts of China would have very different opinions. But I think it's fair to say that Xi Jinping is actually very popular among many parts of China, where the Chinese people very much like his anti-corruption campaign. But at the same time, there is also a different part of China that has been very concerned about his very heavy-handed repressive measures in the past 5 years. But the most important thing for the Chinese people is continued economic prosperity and political stability, and that is exactly what Xi Jinping is trying to deliver. I don't quite agree with the characterization of Xi Jinping as sort of a replica of Mao, even though that's very often portrayed in the media. It is true that he has centralized power to himself to a far greater degree than his predecessor, like Hu Jintao. But I think, in a sense, he has come to power in a very different situation. I think when he came to power, he was in a much less secure position. And we may not see sort of the bickering and the fighting behind the scenes, but I believe that one of the major political tasks ahead of him is to try to get rid of the influences of the past sort of leaders. And he has to try to secure that personal power, not only for himself, but for the successors that he will pick. So I think after the Congress, if we can sort of take a look at the kind of people that he has elevated to positions of power, if he appoints young reformers like Wang Yang, that would be a signal that Xi is in fact a reformist at heart, but that he had to first consolidate his personal power as well as the power of his collective leadership in order to take these reforms forward.
I beg to differ. I think it's a fantasy that once he has consolidated his power, he will move towards the path of reform. That's a fantasy. At the current moment, he's grooming people from the so-called 6th generation and the 7th generation. But most of these are members of the Xi Jinping faction. That means his underlings, cronies, and proteges who worked for him or with him when he was provincial leader in Fujian province and also party secretary of Zhejiang from 1985 to 2007. At this stage, I have looked at the track records of his proteges. None of them have reformist orientations. In fact, they have enjoyed meteoric rises to the top, even helicopter rise to the top, largely because they have professed full loyalty to Xi Jinping. So, of course, over the long term, things may change. But at this stage, particularly if you have heard Xi Jinping's 3-hour-long report this morning, I don't see any elements of reform as is understood in not only the West, but Asia.
Okay. Huang An, I'd like to ask you again about really public sentiment here, because you said that the Chinese public really wants continued economic prosperity, but Xi Jinping himself even admits that China's development has been, quote, inadequate and unbalanced. And in a sense, China has lost the very ideals of the Communist Party, which is about the shared wealth and the equality that society expects to see. Can he reverse that? Or are those divisions now entrenched in this Chinese economic model? And will that keep the public happy going forward?
That is an excellent question. And by the way, when I say reforms, I mean economic reforms, but not political reforms. It is entirely possible for Xi Jinping and his collective leadership going forward to undertake economic reforms without political reforms. In the past 35 to 40 years, what has happened in China is that China has actually lifted 800 million people out of poverty, has created a large middle class, but that was actually done without redistribution, without anti-poverty policies. And as a result, we see very high income inequality in China today. So for Xi Jinping to continue distributing, creating this economic growth and distributing wealth to those who have been left behind, you can see that some of his major policies include a targeted anti-poverty campaign to lift the last 10% of the poorest people in China out of poverty. You see part of that. But the really difficult task moving forward is how to actually take China from a middle income to a high income economy. And in order to do that, he would actually really have to change the role of the government in the economy. You would have to have a government that is much less centered on planning, on engineering, on trying to sort of predict and structure the market, but really let market forces sort of take over in order to create those high-tech creative industries. And so this is, I think, the major challenge for Xi Jinping. I do not think at all that he's willing to let go of political power or to loosen sort of the political control. But at the same time, the type of economic growth that China needs moving forward does require a lot more political freedom. So that is actually the real tension for Xi Jinping.
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, Huang An, and let me have Surab comment on this, you think the economy will have to open further, closer towards the free markets in order to continue to create that economic growth. But Surab, let me ask you, that is not the true spirit of the Communist Party. Do you agree?
Okay. Yes, when we talk, we are not going to see political reform or liberalization anytime soon, or definitely not in the next 5 years. We might see a broadening of the space, social space for Chinese citizens, but not necessarily political rights. So yes, maybe from that perspective, it stays on the path the Communist Party has moved ahead on. But you know, when Xi Jinping came to power, in 5 years back, and at the November 2013 third plenum, he put out this long document with regard to the next generation of reforms. In many ways, that November 2013 third plenum presentation document bore shades of what Deng Xiaoping had put out at the third plenum in November 1978. Deng had talked about liberalization and trying to open the economy. And of course, at that point of time, it was a very underdeveloped economy. So it was a very agrarian economy. So open agricultural markets and then go towards light manufacturing. And at that point of time, too, Deng had maintained strong political control so that all the factional strife and the decay that had set in the 1970s could be that order could have been created from that chaos, and then the country could then focus on economic liberalization. In very similar ways, Xi Jinping's November 13th. Can I just finish on that one, please? Can I just finish that one? On the November 2013 reforms, the purpose is, again, try to knock out the corruption and the strife and the factions which have set in to a very large extent, try to bring, again, some degree of order to chaos, and then now move this economy forward from being this manufacturing-led and just purely growth-led economy to a more consumerist economy, to a more innovative economy, and where the role of the Communist Party is more welfarist-oriented too.
Surab Gupta, I am unfortunately going to have to give you the last word because we are completely out of time, actually, for this segment. But I'd like to thank all three of you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come, will Austria's new leader side with a party that has ties to neo-Nazis? And the cost of fighting corruption. We look at the killing of Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Austria is set to have a new chancellor, 31-year-old Sebastian Kurz. His Conservative People's Party won the most votes in Sunday's election, but not an outright majority, which means he has to choose a coalition partner. There are two dramatically different options, one leaning left and one to the right. But it's widely expected Kurz will go with the far-right Freedom Party, leading Austria down a path that is more Eurosceptic, Islamophobic, and anti-refugee. Shoaib Hassan looks at how the world's youngest leader could change Austria and the globe.
He's called the wonder kid of Austrian politics, and at just 31 years old, Sebastian Kurz seems to be living up to his reputation. His Conservative Party has just emerged from elections as the largest in parliament, which means Kurz is expected to become the youngest head of state in Europe once he negotiates a coalition partner.
Der heutige Tag ist ein historischer. Der heutige Tag ist unsere Chance, die Führung in diesem Land zu übernehmen und für echte Veränderungen in Österreich zu sorgen. Vielen Dank euch dafür.
It was Kurt's baby face that fronted the People's Party, or OVP. He made his name as the world's youngest foreign minister, and much of his popularity is based on his tough line against immigration. But his critics say he's aligned his party's policies with the far-right Austrian Freedom Party. They have also made significant gains.
Damit bin ich nicht einverstanden.
The election result is not entirely acceptable because the Freedom Party might get into the government. That worries me. I don't like that.
The victory by Kurt's OVP suggests the far right has again proven itself relevant in Europe. It has also made substantial gains in Hungary, Italy, and the Netherlands. President Emmanuel Macron's victory in France had led to hopes that a wave of anti-immigrant policies had ebbed. But the Austrian elections have shown the far right still has broad appeal. It's something that remains troubling for the European Union's leadership, and particularly for Germany.
Auf der anderen Seite ist die relativ starke FPÖ natürlich eine große Herausforderung, auch für die politischen Kräfte in Österreich. Der Wahlkampf war sehr hart geführt insgesamt und ich denke, wir warten jetzt die Regierungsbildung ab und dann werden wir natürlich auch gerade auf der europäischen Bühne hoffentlich gut miteinander zusammenarbeiten.
But will that also include a prominent role for the far right? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Vienna is Christoph Matznetter. He is the Federal Party Secretary for the Social Democratic Party of Austria. And also from Vienna is Begum Gordu. She is an expert on minority and women's rights at the NGO Aliter. Thanks both so much for joining us. Unlike their counterparts in France and the Netherlands, Austrians voted to embrace their right-wing politicians. Had it not been for the issue of immigration, Christoph, let me start with you. Would Sebastian Kurz be the chancellor-in-waiting of Austria right now?
The situation was there that the young new leader from the Austrian People's Party, the Conservative Party, Sebastian Kurz, has shifted the position of the Conservatives. They have since the last year, beginning and starting with the election campaign, bringing the same politic like the FPO, the Freedom Party from the right wing. So the decision was relatively clear. In the election from last Sunday, about 58 to 60% of the Austrian voters has voted for a little bit xenophobic policy, embracing motions like Islamophobic motions, fear from refugees, fear from migrants. And this is one of the main points for the success of Mr. Kurz.
But also, I have heard certain Austrians say that the opposition, your party, the Social Democratic Party of Austria, was not strong enough, and in a sense, helped lift Kurz to victory.
Certainly, there are many reasons for this. There was problems in the electoral campaign of my party, the Social Democrats. This was certainly has a little bit impact on this question, but at the end of the day, it was a clear decision. Two parties, every time speaking about the problems with the migrants and refugees and other peoples coming to Austria, have success with plus more than 5% for the Freedom Party, for the extreme right, and more than 7 to 8% for the People's Party. So it was clear at the end of the day, there was a decision of the Austrian population. They want a policy from now which will be more in distance to the people coming to Austria, and it's completely different to the position of the Federal Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel.
Okay. Let me ask Begum Gordu the same question. Do you think it had more to do with a weaker opposition or more to do with the issue of immigration that Sebastian Kurz and the far-right parties spoke so strongly against?
It's
I think the the election result in Austria is the latest indication for the very sharply right shift in Europe in general. And I think what we don't have to forget is that the normally center-left Social Democratic Party in Austria also turned to the right, so like all parties in Austria, during the coalition with the People's Party. And I hope that they will turn back to the roots of social democracy, so the Muslim minority has the option for a strong ally in the parliament.
Let me get what you make of that, Christoph. Did the socialists, in a sense, pander to the xenophobic tendencies of some of the Austrian public? Go ahead.
Certainly, we was trying to bring other topics in the electoral campaign, especially the social question, the question of taxation, and all the other unemployment situation. But on the end of the day, it was clear that you cannot cover up this question of migrants and refugees. The topic is there, and the population want to talk about this. And it's true, also the Austrian Social Democrats was in the government in the last year, was trying to find solution to reduce the fear of the population. For example, with a new Islam legislation with restriction also for the association in the country, the NGOs. But at the same time, the topic was present in the population, and it was not possible to cover up. So it's clear that the election result from the last Sunday changed the country, and it will be harder for the people here living here. We have hundreds of thousands of people with migration background, many of them coming from Turkey, or their parents coming from there, and their living and working situation will not be better after this result in the elections.
Okay, Begum Gordu, in seeing that, you feel, in a sense, all political parties were responsible for pandering to the anti-immigrant sentiment that is prevalent through several parts of Europe right now. Do you fear now that Sebastian Kurz, going forward, will continue along those lines? Are you expecting to see an even further rise in Islamophobia and xenophobia to the point that it will actually change Austria's political policies?
Mm-hmm. I myself, as an activist for minorities in general and for the Muslim minority here in Austria, which is the biggest religious minority in Austria, we don't have to forget this. I am also concerned about the harsh politics, which was mentioned, towards the Muslim institutions and the laws concerning the headscarves, which exclude Muslim women from the job market, despite good education, but also exclude them from society. And I think not only the far-right parties in Austria did this campaigning of Islamophobia and instrumentalized the Muslim community and minority here in Austria, but also, as I mentioned before, all other parties as left parties also, and also the Social Democratic Party. And I want to say it again, it's very important for the Muslim minority to have an ally in the parliament, to have a voice against this Islamophobia and to combat this Islamophobia in Austria with the Muslim community.
Okay. I'd like to turn, if we can, to the role that Austria might be playing in the European Union going forward. Christoph, let me start with you. Do you think the real influence of Austrian politics in the context of the European Union has been slightly underestimated? I mean, we in the foreign press perhaps should take some responsibility, because we seem to pay a lot more attention to the French election, for example, much less to the Austrian election. And now many are saying the Austrians will prove very influential in the European Union in its way forward. What do you think?
It was first the position of Austria as a little bit a spokesman for the Balkan situation and Eastern countries. But however, after the political change in Warsaw in Poland or with Mr. Orban in Hungary, Austria is the first Western country. If this country change position and make more a position like the government in Warsaw or Budapest, this will change the political position of the whole European Union. It will be the big question to Mr. Kurz in the next time, if he is willing and able to hold the liberal and open policy line in the European Union. And it was also important that our federal president, Mr. van der Bellen, yesterday expecting a government with a proposal to not change the pro-European policy and so more open and liberal policy Austria's in the European Union. I hope this will be also the situation after building of the new government.
Because do you think Sebastian Kurz will move toward an exit of the EU? That may be a bit extreme. He's never really spoken on those terms prior. But do you think that may change, especially if he goes into coalition with a far-right party?
No, I don't think so. In reality, the Austrian People's Party cannot shift 180 degrees their position. And even the Freedom Party has given signals they don't want a referendum decision like the Brexit decision in the UK. And the last point is, there is a big majority in the Austrian population that don't want an exit from the European Union, so I don't see the risk for the moment.
Okay, Begum, does that give you a sense of comfort in any way, knowing that that doesn't seem to be on the agenda for this new leadership going forward, and that at least Austria being part of the EU, minorities may have a stronger and clearer voice through EU laws?
Yes, I think we have to mention that Austria has a culture of this welcome state and of an open-minded culture, and I hope that this will be the future too. And I don't think that Sebastian Kurz will have any plans to leave the EU or something like that. I have nothing to add to that.
But does it, I'll ask again, does it give you at least a sense of comfort there that Austria will not completely go in its own direction?
Not really. We cannot be sure of that because, as I mentioned before, in whole Europe there is this sharp shift to the right, and so we have to see this as a problem of whole Europe. Yeah.
Okay.
And yes.
Okay, Christoph, let me ask you, in hindsight now, and seeing that the direction not only Austria has moved in, but some of its European counterparts, do you think immigration, particularly the issue of immigration, could have been managed better in Austria in order to avoid having elevated these far-right parties today?
Yeah, Shirley, the problem was also that after the big wave of refugees in the year 2015, there is now a complete concentration in the urban regions, in the cities. And it was interesting also in the election results that the biggest shift to the right wing was on the countryside, where there is not only a few people with migration background or with refugee background. So the fear was bigger in this population circle that have no contact with the people coming from other countries. And in Vienna, where we have a huge concentration, even in the urban regions of Vienna, where there's the highest concentration, there was a completely different result in the elections. There was my Social Democratic Party who has won the race in this field. So I'm a little bit optimistic that in living together, in working together, in understanding each other, there will be a better situation also in the opinion of the population, and so we can turn this result in elections in 5 years.
Okay, Begum, do you share that sense of optimism at all at this point?
Yes, I share because I also think that having no contact with migration or with minorities is the thing we have to change. Yeah, we have to change this or have to stabilize this problem in society together with the Muslim community. And as mentioned before, in Vienna, there was the Social Democratic Party winning. And here in Austria, we say Vienna is different. So we saw it again.
Okay. We're down to our last minute or so. So, Christoph, I'd like to ask you on a slightly more political note. Kurz, as we know, is an intelligent man, but he lacks some of the hardcore, real political party experience, given he's only 31. It's an experience that far-right leader Heinz-Christian Strache does have. As coalition partners, how do you see their power leadership dynamic actually playing out?
Yeah, this is a little complicated, the question. However, Mr. Kurz was 7 years in the Austrian government, so it's a long time of experience, even with 31 or 32 years old. However, I think he has seen the success way of Viktor Orban in Budapest. There was also the discussion in the television between him and Mr. Strache, where both of them was talking who is the better friend of Mr. Orban. So we are not quite sure if he wants to be the serious conservative politic man for the future, or if he wants to be the big pop star like Viktor Orban in Hungary. You will see what the future will bring. I cannot do prognostic in the personal view and in the personal intentions of Mr. Kurz.
Okay, fair enough. Christoph Matznetter, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us there from Vienna, as well as Begum Gordu, also from Vienna. Thank you both so much for talking to us on this edition of the Newsmakers.
President Juncker and the European Commission condemn this attack in the strongest terms possible. The right of a journalist to investigate, ask uncomfortable questions, and report effectively is at the heart of our values and needs to be guaranteed at all times.
Anti-corruption blogger and journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia challenged the highest echelons of power on the island nation of Malta. Her final blog post warned, "There are crooks everywhere. The situation is desperate." 30 minutes after posting those words, Galizia was killed. A bomb planted in her car detonated as she drove just a short distance from her home on Monday. She was best known for publishing reports that linked the Prime Minister to the Panama Papers, those leaked documents that exposed the offshore accounts of the rich and powerful around the world. Hours after that bomb took her life, Galizia's son said, "My mother was assassinated because she stood between the rule of law and those who sought to violate it." Well, joining me now from Valletta in Malta is Andrew Borg Cardona. He is a lawyer and a close friend of Daphne Caruana Galizia's family. He's also a vocal protester against government corruption. Thank you so much for joining us. I will let you begin with telling us what you think Malta and the world has just lost.
I think we've lost, well, Malta definitely has lost one of the best investigative journalists we've ever had. Some actually say that she was the only investigative journalist we ever had. There are others who work full-time for the media who do investigate stories, but it has to be remembered that Daphne was virtually writing this blog as a one-woman, one-person effort, and it wasn't even at all her main job. She was a publisher of magazines relating to food and lifestyle. That is where, if you want to put it this way, she paid the rent. The blog was simply her own personal protest against the violators of the rule of law, and she's been going at it for many years now, as her son pointed out. That is Daphne Caruana Galizia. What the world has lost is somebody like that. Okay. Malta has lost our only one.
Now, you are one of the many people who respected and admired her work, but you are aware that some say she was as despised as she was adored. Some of her writings were actually described as personal and unfounded attacks Opposition leader Adrian Delia even said her work amounted to a purely personal and manipulative attack on his family and on him. Help us understand how she was so controversial.
Well, what Adrian Delia decided to say and think is, of course, up to him. I'm not aware that you're interviewing him. He can stand up for himself or not. I happen to disagree with his characterization. Caruana Galizia's writing about him was factual. It was, to an extent, based on truth as she knew it. Again, I'm not here to pass judgment on anybody. Caruana Galizia held herself to the highest of high standards of integrity and professionalism, and she expected everybody else, whether they're politicians, day-to-day lawyers, to use my own profession, or anyone else, she expected them to behave in the same way she expected herself to behave. That is, professionally and with integrity.
Then you believe
anybody who failed to go that way.
Then you believe her arrest back in 2013 was also quite unjust?
Oh yes, of course it was. I was at the police station where she was being held because I found out about it and went off there. I'm a family friend. I'm a law partner with her husband. It was totally ridiculous in 2013, but that is a very minor incident compared to others we've had in this country. She was arrested, if you must know, for spreading an opinion in the silent day before a general election. In 2013, when the internet was open to everybody and everybody was doing precisely as they wished. It was the other side of ridiculous. Anyway, I don't think that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, let's move on then, because while we've been reporting about her investigation of the Panama Papers and how they implicated very powerful politicians, particularly in Malta, she'd also made a number of enemies among those with links to organized crime, and many actually suspect now that only the mafia could have executed this kind of attack. Do you share that opinion? And if so, do you fear that her killers may not be brought to justice?
I am quite convinced that her killers will never be brought to justice. The person or persons who manufactured the bomb and who actually pressed the button might someday be found in a pool of blood somewhere, and some story will be built up by whoever about who they were and what they did. But you use the word mafia. Mafia is not a single entity. Mafia is a catch-all phrase that we journalists, I used to be a journalist myself or a column writer, use to describe the people behind massive corruption which reaches everywhere within the state, within society. It could have been the mafia, it could have been the Ndrangheta, it could have been anybody, it could have been the Chinese tongs. Come on, let's not lose ourselves in descriptions. Yes, Daphne Caruana Galizia must have made enemies amongst the powerful money launderers, amongst the powerful drug dealers, and within the criminal world, because she linked many of their activities with the corruption that she was busy fighting, trying to fight in Maltese society.
Are you pleased?
It was, if you want to call it the mafia, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Organized crime.
I interrupted you. Yes, sorry.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's a very complex topic there. But let me ask then if you are at least pleased that the FBI has taken charge of this investigation.
Let me first query whether the FBI has taken charge of the investigation. As far as I know, the investigation is still being run by the Maltese judicial and investigative authorities. I'm confident that the criminal investigation department within the police has got very skillful investigators. Obviously, we're a small country with limited resources, so the help that an organization like the FBI or the Dutch investigative authorities can give would be most welcome. Many people, however, are querying why, given the very great resemblance that this method of assassination has with the assassination of Falcone and Borsellino in Palermo in the mid-90s, why the Digos, the Italian or Sicilian authorities, were not asked to help. They're only half an hour away from us. The FBI haven't even arrived yet. But still, far be it from me to question what methods our government tends to use, but many people, myself included, are wondering, why the FBI? Is this simply because so many Maltese watch American television and might think that the FBI are something special? frankly, I don't think they're any more special than the Digos, the Italians, or even the special branch, who are 3 hours away from us.
Right now, the opposition leader, again, Adrian Delia, who is not necessarily a fan of Daphne Caruana Galizia, he nonetheless is calling on the Prime Minister to resign at this point, because he said it's the Prime Minister's fault for really dismantling the police force and making criminals feel more comfortable putting bombs under cars. Do you think he has a point there?
Well, yes, he has a point. Whether he's made it correctly at the right time is not for me to judge. I'm not a political commentator anymore. I used to be, in another life, if you like. Yes, the buck stops with the Prime Minister. The buck also stops with the Minister for Police for allowing the police force to become what many people perceive it to have become. It's a point that had to be made. Maybe it was made too early, politically speaking, or not. I'm not going to judge. But yes, the buck does stop with the Prime Minister. Joseph Muscat has been Prime Minister of Malta now for virtually 5 years. And the build-up of laissez-faire, not in the good sense, do what you like, you're not going to get caught. If you get caught, you'll be able to sort your way out of it, has been astronomical. This is the atmosphere, the environment that unfortunately has become prevalent over Malta.
Okay. Andrew Borg Cardona, unfortunately, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from Valletta. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Remember to check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, we're at the TRT World Forum in Istanbul, where we'll be debating the challenges Tunisia's democracy faces 6 years after the Arab Spring. Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.